3,000 wives and children had been evacuated. The base facility was cleared for action. If the Soviets kicked off the war that seemed to be springing from the ground like a new volcano, Keflavik was as ready as it could be. With your permission, Colonel, I want to check a few things at the tower. This forecast is pretty solid for the next 12 hours anyway. Jet stream. Colonel Jeffers looked up from the yard square chart of isobars and wind speed. Same place it's been all week, sir. No sign at all of a change. Okay, go ahead. Keflavik had to get hit, Edwards reminded himself. Everybody knew it, prepared for it, and then tried not to think about it. This most isolated of all NATO outposts on the western coast of Iceland was the barred gate to the North Atlantic. If Ivan wanted to fight a naval war, Iceland had to be neutralized. From Keflavik's 4 runways flew 18 Eagle interceptors, 9 sub-hunting P-3C Orions, and deadliest of all, 3 E-3A AWACS birds, the eyes of the fighters. 2 were operating now. One was circling 20 miles northeast of Cape Contour, the other directly over Ritztang, 150 miles north of Keflavik. This was most unusual. With only 3 AWACS birds available, keeping one constantly in the air was difficult enough. The commander of the Iceland's defense forces was taking all of this very seriously. Max Flight 520, roger. Roll her out, big guy. We need the room, said a tired controller. A few hundred yards away, a C-5A Galaxy cargo plane began to accelerate down runway 18. Edwards took a pair of binoculars to watch. It was hard to get used to the fact that something so monstrous could actually fly. Any word from anywhere? Simon asked Edwards. Nope, nothing since the Norwegian report. Lots of activity at Kola. You know, I picked a hell of a time to come here to work, Mike replied. He went back to checking the calibration of his digital barometer. It had started 6 weeks before. The Soviet naval and long-range aviation groups based at a half-dozen airfields around Severomorsk had exercised almost continuously, flying attack profile missions that could have been directed at nearly anyone. Then, 2 weeks before, the activity had been cut way back. That was the ominous part. First, they drilled all their protection, and then they went to a stands-down maintenance period to make sure that every bird and every instrument was also fully operational. What were they doing now? An attack against Bodo in Norway or Iceland, maybe. Another exercise? There was no telling. Edwards lifted a clipboard to sign off for having checked his tower instruments that day. He could have left it to his enlisted technicians, but they were backstopping the aircraft techs with the fighter squadron, and he could handle it for them. Besides, it gave him an excuse to visit the tower and...
Una prueba de la voz. Vale, es 251, la 18 que decía. Es la voz.
Sí. Mierda.
Ahí decía. Waypoint 2 era Bullseye. ¿Estás abriendo la cabina?
Sí.
Roll left, roll left. Flight controls. Flight controls.
Están despegando. Yo creo que esos son los nuestros. ¿Cómo lo lleva?
Se supone que... coño, alineando.
Alineando.
Eh,
Ponle el store heading. No veas.
¿Mm?
Estoy viendo 60, 70 frames por segundo. Y 75, ¿verdad? 76, 77. La otra versión que no pasaba de 30 a 35. Joder, vaya viento, tío. Si el humo no sube, sale recto.
Inicia taxi si quieres.
Rodando. Qué guay. Esta línea aterradura. Meterle un poco de caña porque si no... Supongo también consumir el central primero.
Copy.
¿Es por aquí? ¿Es esto o no es esto?
Tiene pinta, ¿no?
Me parece ver más pista delante. Es que hay más pista delante. Joder.
Sí, tendríamos que ir por la izquierda, me parece. Sí.
Sí, por la izquierda. Están ya yendo a pista. No sé qué 15 es.
Mr. Simon, the senior enlisted controller said rapidly, I just copied a flash from Sentry 1. Warning red. Many bandits inbound, sir. Approaching from due north to northeast. Sentry 2 is checking in. They got him too. Jesus. Sounds like 40 to 50 bandits, sir. Edwards noted that the inbounds were being called bandits instead of the usual zombies. Anything friendly coming in?
¿Dónde vas?
Sir, we got a Mac C-141 20 minutes out. 8 more behind it at 5-minute intervals, all inbound from Dover.
Ah,
Tell
vale.
them to turn back and get an acknowledgement. Keflavik is closed to all inbounds until further notice. Simon turns to his
¿Despego en carrera?
telecommunications man.
Despega,
Tell
despega.
Eros to radio Sackland that we are under attack and to get the word out. Klaxons
Carrera,
erupted all around them. Below, in the early morning shadows, ground crewmen pulled red-flagged safety pins off the waiting interceptors. Edward saw a pilot drain a styrofoam cup and begin to strap himself in tight. The starter
Carrera.
carts next to each fighter belched black smoke as they generated power to turn the engines. Tower, this is Hunter Leader. We're scrambling. Clear those runways, boy. Simon took the microphone. Roger, Hunter Leader, the runways are yours. Scatter plan
Voy a
Alpha.
hacer-
Go for it.
por
Out.
ellos,
¿Mm?
Below,
voy a intentar
canopies were coming
pillarlo.
down. Chocks were pulled away from wheels,
Copy.
and each crew chief gave his pilot a smart salute. The shriek of jet engines changed to a roar as the aircraft started to roll upwardly off the flight line. Where's your battle station, Mike? Simon asked. The Met building. Edwards nodded and headed for the door. Luck, guys. Aboard Sentry 2, the radar operators watched a broad semicircle of blips converging on them.
Joder.
Each
Me
blip
toco
had
combustión
BGR
porque se
painted
están
next to it,
yendo
plus data on course, altitude, and speed.
hacia el nudo.
Each blip was a Tu-16 Badger bomber of Soviet naval aviation. There were 24 of them, inbound for Keflavik at a speed of 600 knots. They had approached at low altitude to stay below the E-3A's radar horizon, and once detected, were now climbing rapidly 200 miles away. This mission profile enabled the radar operators to classify them instantly as hostile. There were 4 Eagles on combat air patrol, 2 of them with operating AWACS. But it was close to changeover point, and the fighters were too low on fuel to race after the Badgers on afterburner. They were directed to head for the incoming Russian bombers at 600 knots, and could not yet detect the Badgers on their own missile targeting radar. Sentry 1 off Cape Contour reported something worse. Her blips were supersonic Tu-22M backfires. coming in slowly enough to indicate that they were heavily loaded with external ordnance. The Eagle here also moved off to intercept. 100 miles behind them, the two F-15s kept on point defense over Reykjavik had just been topped off from an orbiting tanker and were charging northeast at 1,000 knots, while the remainder of the squadron was even now leaving the ground. The radar picture from both AWACS aircraft was being transmitted by digital link to Keflavik's Fighter Ops Center so that ground personnel could monitor the action. Now that the fighters were rotating off the ground, the crews for every other aircraft at the air station worked frantically to ready their birds for flight. They had practiced this task 8 times in the past month. Some flight crews had been sleeping with their aircraft. Others were summoned from their quarters no more than 400 yards away. Those aircraft just back from patrol had their fuel tanks topped off and were pre-flighted by the ground crew. Marine and Air Force guards, not already at their posts, rushed to them. It was just as well that the attack had come at this hour. There was only a handful of civilians about, and civilian air traffic was at its lowest. On the other hand, the men at Keflavik had been on double duty for a week now. They were tired. Things which might have been done in 5 minutes now took 7 or 8. Edwards was back in his meteorological office, wearing his field jacket, flak jacket, and Fritz-style helmet. His emergency duty station, he could not think of his office as it. MV Julius Krusik. 20 miles southwest of Keflavik, the Dr. Likes was also a beehive of activity. As each Soviet bomber squadron launched its air-to-ground missiles, its commander transmitted a predetermined code word that the Krusik copied.
Tendríamos que mirar al este, ¿no?
Rudder left, Captain. Bring his bow into the wind. A full regiment of airborne infantry, many of them seasick from 2 weeks aboard the huge barge carrier, was at work testing and loading weapons. The Pusik's augmented crew was stripping the false work from the uppermost 4 barges, revealing each, in fact, to be a Lebed-type assault hovercraft. The 6-man crew of each removed the covers over the air intakes that led to the engines they had tended with loving care for a month. Satisfied, they waved to the craft commanders, who lit off the 3 engines in each of the aftermost pair. The ship's first officer stood at his elevator control station aft. On a hand signal, an 85-man infantry company plus a reinforced mortar team were loaded into each craft. Power was increased, the hovercraft lifted up on their air cushions and were winched out. In another 4 minutes, the vehicles were resting on the barge loading elevator that formed the stern of the CB vessel. "Lower away," the first officer ordered. The winch operators lowered the elevator to the surface. The sea was choppy, and 4-foot waves lapped at the Pusik's bifurcated stern. When the elevator was level with the sea, first one, then the other Lebed commander increased power and moved off. At once, the elevator returned to the topmost deck, while the first pair of hovercraft circled their mothership. In 5 more minutes, the 4 assault craft moved off in box formation toward the Keflavik.
Te tengo lejos, estás a unas 8 o 9 millas de mí.
The Pusik continued her turn, returning to a northerly course to make the next hovercraft trip a shorter one. Her weather deck was ringed with armed troops carrying surface-to-air missiles and machine guns. Andreev remained on the bridge,
Sí,
knowing this
pero
was where he
el
belonged.
radio comando que nos
Wishing
salía
he
en
were leading
pantalla
his
nos
assault.
decía a los del este.
Pero es que al este no hay nada. Bueno, vete tú al que hay más al este.
Keflavik, Iceland.
Ok.
Como
Half up.
quieras.
The bandits are all turning right back after launching their ASMs. So far, it's been 2 birds per aircraft. We've got 50, make that 56 inbound missiles, and more are being launched. Nobody behind them, though. I repeat, nothing behind the bomber force. At least we don't have any paratroopers headed in. Hunker down, guys. We now have 60 inbound missiles, Edwards heard as he came through the door. At least they won't be nukes, said a captain. They're shooting 100 missiles at us. They don't fucking need nukes, replied another. Edwards watched the radar picture over the shoulder of one of the officers. It was eerily like an arcade game. Big, slow-moving blips denoted the aircraft. Smaller, quicker blips were the Mach 2 missile. Gotcha, hooted the enlisted radar operator. The leading Eagle had gotten within missile range of the Badgers and exploded one with a Sparrow missile, 10 seconds after it had launched its own missile. A second Sparrow missed its separate target, but a third appeared locked on it. The first fighter's wingman was just launching at yet another Russian. The Soviets had thought this one out, Edwards saw. They were attacking from all around the northern littoral, with lots of space between the bombers, so that no single fighter could engage more than 1 or 2. It was almost like... Anybody check the geometry of this? He asked. What do you mean? The captain looked around. How come you aren't where you belong? Edwards ignored the irrelevancy. What's the chance they're trying to draw our fighters out like? Expensive bait. The captain dismissed the idea. You're saying they might have launched their ASMs from farther out. Maybe they don't fly as far as we thought. Point is, those missiles are 10 minutes out now, the first of them, with about a 5 or 7 minute delay to the last. And not a goddamn thing we can do about it. Yeah. The Eagles were now all airborne, racing north. The last of the backfires had just launched their missiles and were turning back northeast at full power as the Eagles raced at 1,200 knots to catch up. 3 of the interceptors launched missiles, and they succeeded in killing a pair of backfires and damaging a third. The Zulu fighters, which had scrambled off the deck, could not catch the backfires, the commanding controller on Sentry 1 noted, cursing himself for not having sent them after the older, less valuable Badgers, some of which they might have caught. Instead, he ordered them to slow down and had his controllers vector them towards the supersonic missile. Penguin 8, the first of the P-3C Orion anti-submarine warfare aircraft, was rolling now, down runway 22. It had been on patrol only 5 hours before, and its flight crew was still trying to shake off the sleep as they rotated the prop jet aircraft off the
70.000
concrete.
pies, tío, esto es un misil.
Tipping over now, the radar operator said. The first Russian missile was almost overhead, beginning its terminal dive. The Eagles had hit 2 of the incoming missiles, but courses and altitudes had been against them, and most of their Sparrows had missed, unable to catch the Mach 2 missile. The F-15s orbited over central Iceland, well away from their base, as each pilot wondered if he'd have enough
no me
fuel to
sale
return. Edwards cringed as the first landed, or didn't land.
el
The
rango.
air-to-surface missile had a radar proximity fuse. It detonated 20 meters
Lo voy a
off the
lanzar, a
ground,
ver.
and the effects were horrific. It exploded directly over International
Juan.
Highway, 200 yards from Air Ops, its fragments ripping into a number of buildings, the worst hit being the base fire station. Edwards fell to the floor as fragments lashed through the wooden wall.
Nah,
The
no
door
he
was
perdido.
torn off its hinges by the blast, and the air filled with dust. A moment later, at the SO facility 100 yards away, a fuel truck exploded, sending a fireball towering into the sky and dropping burning jet fuel for blocks around. Electrical power was immediately lost. Radars, radios, and room lights went out at once, and battery-powered emergency lights didn't come on as they were supposed to. For a terrified moment, Edward wondered if the first missile really might have been a nuke. The blast had rippled through his chest, and he felt sudden nausea as his body tried to adjust to the sensations that assaulted it. He looked around and saw a man knocked unconscious by a falling light fixture. He didn't know if he was supposed to buckle his helmet strap or not, and somehow this question seemed enormously important at the moment, though he didn't remember why. Another missile landed farther away, and then for a minute or so the
Hostia,
sound
tío,
blended
el
into
puto
a series
radar
of
de
immense
mierda.
thunderclaps.
Esto hace lo que le da la gana.
Edwards was choking from the dust. It felt as though his chest would burst, and impulsively he bolted for the door to get fresh air. He was greeted by a solid wall of heat.
Ahora
The SO
parece
facility
que
was a
va,
roaring
¿no?
mass of flames, which had already engulfed the
Me
nearby
bloca
photo
algo
lab
a
and
100
base thrift
millas,
shop.
no entiendo.
More smoke rose from the enlisted housing area to the east. A half-dozen aircraft still on the flight line would never leave it. Their wings snapped like toys from the blast of a missile that had exploded directly over the runway crossroads. A smashed E-3A Sentry burst into flames before his eyes. He turned to see that the control tower had been damaged too, all its windows gone. Edwards ran that way, not thinking to take his jeep. 2 minutes later, he entered the tower breathlessly to find the crew all dead, torn apart by flying glass, the tiled floor covered with blood. Radio receivers were still making noise over desk-mounted speakers, but he couldn't seem to find a working transmitter. Penguin 8. What the hell is that? The Orion pilot
Which
said.
one?
He turned his aircraft violently to the left and increased power. They had been orbiting 10 miles out from Keflavik, watching the smoke and flames rising from their home field, when 4 massive objects passed under them. It's a... the co-pilot breathed. Where... The 4 Lebeds were moving at over 40 knots, bouncing roughly over the 4 to 5 foot waves. About 80 feet long and 35 wide, each had a pair of ducted propellers atop, immediately forward of a tall aircraft-type rudder painted with the Soviet naval ensign, a red
Nice.
hammer and sickle over a blue stripe. They were already too close to shore for the Orion to use any of her weapons. The pilot watched incredulously as he approached, and any doubts he had ended as the 30mm cannon fired at them. It missed
Se está
wide.
yendo por el de la
The pilot
derecha, ¿no?
jerked the Orion
Sí, me he
around to the
desviado
west.
de la derecha.
Vale, voy a por el de la
Taco, tell
izquierda del
Keflavik
todo, entonces.
ASW ops they got company coming. 4 armed hovercraft, type unknown, but Russian. And they gotta be carrying troops. Flight. The tactical coordinator reported back
Spy.
30 seconds later.
Lo que pasa es que
Keflavik is off the air.
15.
ASW Ops Center is gone. The tower is gone too. I'm trying to raise the sentries. Maybe we can get a fighter or two. Okay, but keep trying Keflavik. Get our radar lit off. We'll see if we can find where they came from. Get our harpoons lit off too.
Está cold aquel, sí.
Fox 1.
Joder, los F-15. ¿Dónde se ha encargado este?
Fox 1. Hijo puta. Splash.
No sé si son los llamas o qué.
Altitude. Altitude.
12, Overlord, 1-1, Bravo, 108, 460 at 14,000 knots.
Fox 1. Flash.
Mierda.
¿Qué?
Que he disparado dos Fox 1 sin querer, pensando que tiraba cañón. Vale.
¿Pero no te lo habías cargado?
No, ahora sí. Splash 1, 2, 22.
Vale, queda uno que se está yendo y como para pillar a este, tío. ¿Cómo estás de combustible?
Estoy con 19. No, sí, 19. Recuperando altura porque me he ido abajo del todo. Oh, no, pero eso se ha
Tío, está
ido...
más de 80 millas y call, tío. Es imposible pillarlo. Y ha desaparecido de radar ahora.
Overlord, 1-1, 1-1, request bogey dope. 1-1, Overlord, 1-1, clean.
Vale, veo que lo tienes bloqueado en Datalink, ¿verdad?
No, no lo tengo bloqueado.
Pues eso me parece.
Lo tenía en Roswell Scan, pero no estaba bloqueado. Pero bien, eso da.
Yo lo tengo ahora. Está a 12.000 pies huyendo. Claro está. Pero está a 150 millas o por ahí.
Bueno, yo lo tengo a 66 millas con un closure de 480 y 6.300 libras.
Yo voy con 9.200. Voy detrás tuyo, pero a ti te tengo todavía lejos también.
Ya, no lo voy a pillar.
Yo me he subido a 37.000 pies.
Ya Max 1.64. No sabía que corriera tanto. A 4.000 pies me parece que se acaba esto. Hay 4.000 libras. 5.5. Anda Rusia, ¿no? Está aterrizando.
No me jodas, con la pista vino.
No sé, está a 3.000 pies.
Sí, sí, lo veo, lo veo.
Al menos eso dice.
Pues tenía a Rusia cerca, ¿eh? Pues sí, está ahí entrando en final.
Yo lo he perdido, a ver.
No, yo me he puesto en F2 a verlo, a ver si lo veía. Sí, sí, hay un Tu-22 con tren fuera y en final de la pista.
Vale, ya tengo. Pies. Pero 1.000 pies. 4.000 libras.
Yo a ti te tengo a casi 80 millas por delante mío.
Me quita por combustión. Estoy bajando, a ver si tengo tali.
Ahora lo veo a él.
Colocado. Shoot. Fox One.
Cruzando umbral. Ruedas en el suelo.
Mierda.
Sí, tu misil ha explotado al lado de la pista.
Fox 2.
Ahora
Toma,
sí.
La ha dado. Activo. A ver si llego a casa. Menos mal que no han metido aquí Sans ni nada.
Keflavik, Iceland. Edward
Further
was surveying
tasking?
the damage through binoculars when he
Sí.
heard the message come in and could not answer. Now what do I do? He looked around and saw one useful thing, a Hammer Ace radio.
El Dakan
He
había
took the
dicho que era el
oversized backpack
110,
and ran down
¿verdad?
the steps. He had to find the Marine officers and warn them.
111.
The hovercraft raced up Juppie Vogler Cove and came to
Okay.
land a minute later, less than a mile from the airbase. The troopers gratefully noted the smoother ride as their craft spread out to line abreast, 300 yards between them as they tore across the flat, rocky course toward the NATO airbase. What in the hell? A Marine corporal said. Like a dinosaur coming to the picnic, a massive object appeared on the horizon, apparently coming overland at high speed. You! Marine, get over here! Edward screamed. A jeep with 3 enlisted men stopped, then raced toward him.
Le he dicho que quiero un
Get me to your
tanque.
CO fast. CO's dead, sir, the sergeant said. CP took a hit, Lieutenant. Fucking gone. Where's the alternate? Elementary school. Go, I gotta let them know. We got bad guys coming in from the sea. Shit, you got a radio? Tried calling, sir, but no answer. The sergeant turned south down International Highway. At least 3 missiles had landed here, judging by the smoke. All around the small city that had been Keflavik Air Base was a loose collection of smoking fires. A number of people in uniforms were running around, doing things that Edwards didn't have time to guess at. Was anybody in charge? The elementary school had also been hit. The third of the building still standing was a mass of flame. Sergeant, that radio work? Yes, sir, but it ain't tuned into the perimeter guards. Well, fix it. Right. The sergeant dialed into a different frequency. The Lebeds halted in 2 pairs, each a quarter-mile from the perimeter. The bow door on each opened, and out rolled a pair of BMD infantry assault vehicles, followed by mortar crews who began at once to set up their weapons. The 73mm guns and missile launchers on the mini-tanks began to engage the Marine defensive positions as the reinforced company in each vehicle advanced slowly and skillfully, using their cover and taking advantage of their fire support. The assault force had been hand-picked from units that had fought in Afghanistan. Each man had been under fire before. The Lebeds immediately turned crab-like
O
and
sea,
sped
está a
back to sea
97 millas
to
y
pick up
dice
yet more infantrymen.
127 millas.
Already
la
elements
línea,
of 2
40
elite
millas.
airborne battalions were engaging a single company of Marines. The frantic words on the platoon radio nets were all too clear. The base electrical supply was cut, and along with it, the main radios. The Marine officers were dead, and there was no one to coordinate the defense. Edwards wondered if anyone really knew what the hell was going on. He decided that it
Yo le
probably
doy
didn't
el
matter.
F10 y no hace nada.
MV Julius Fusik.
No, es que a mí me
Aircraft
F10 le
sighted,
doy
port
yo.
bow, a lookout screamed. Pierre
Y ha
raised his
saltado al
binoculars
siguiente
to his
punto.
eyes and
Que ahora
swore
es
up.
cuando las fuerzas
He saw
rusas
what would
invaden
only be
Islandia.
missiles dangling from each wing of the multi-engined aircraft. Penguin 8. Well, looky what we got here, the Orion's pilot said quietly. Our old friend the doctor likes. Combat, flight. What else is around? Nothing, flight. Not another surface ship for over 100 miles. They had just completed a complete circuit of the horizon, scanning with their surface search radar. And it's for goddamn sure those hovercraft didn't come in off no submarine. The pilot adjusted course to pass within 2 miles of the ship, with the sun behind the 4-engine patrol aircraft. His co-pilot examined the ship through binoculars. Onboard TV cameras operated by the weapons crew would provide even better close-up pictures. They saw a pair of helicopters warming up. Someone aboard the Fusik panicked and fired a handheld SA-7 missile. It failed to lock onto the Orion and blazed off directly into the low sun. MV Julius Fusik. Idiot, Garoff growled. The smoke from the rocket motor didn't even come close to the aircraft. He'll shoot at us now. All ahead flank. Helmsman, be alert. Penguin 8. Okay, the pilot said, turning away from the merchantman. Taco, we got a target for your harpoon. Any luck with Keflavik? Negative, but Sentry 1 is relaying the data into Scotland. They say a bunch of missiles hit Keflavik. Looks like the place is closed whether we keep it or not. The pilot cursed briefly. Okay, we'll blow this pirate right out of the water.
¿Hay tanque?
Raj flight,
A ver.
the tactical coordinator replied. 2 minutes before we can launch the... Damn, I got a red light on the port side harpoon. The sucker won't arm. Well, play with the bastard, the pilot growled. It didn't work. In the haste to get off the ground, the missile's control cables had not been fully attached by the weary ground crew. Okay, I got one working. Ready. Shoot. The missile dropped clear of the wing and fell 30 feet before its engine ignited. Pusik's weather deck was lined with paratroopers, many holding hand-launched SAMs and hoping to intercept the incoming ASM. Paco, see if you can raise an F-15. Maybe they can rip this baby up with 20 millimeters. Doing that already. We got a pair of Eagles coming in, but they're Scotia fuel. 1 or 2 passes will be all they can manage. Forward, the pilot had binoculars to his eyes, watching the white-painted missile skimming the wave tops. Go, baby, go. MP Julius Fusik. Rocket coming in, low on the horizon, port side. At least we have good lookouts, Kirov thought. He estimated the distance to the horizon and gave the missile a speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour. Right hard rudder, he screamed. The helmsman threw the wheel over as far as it would go and held it down. You cannot run from a missile, Kirov, the general said quietly. I know this. Watch, my friend.
Está más lejos el tanque
Black
que la
Hole
pista,
vessel was
tío.
turning radically to starboard. As she did so, the ship heeled in the opposite direction, the same way a car rolls away from a turn on a flat road, which artificially raised the waterline on the vulnerable port side. Some enterprising officers aboard fired signal flares, hoping to decoy the missile away. But all the missile's microchip brain cared about was the enormous blip that occupied the center of its radar seeker head. It noted that the ship's heading was changing slightly and altered its own course accordingly. Half a mile from the target, the harpoon lurched upward from its 10-foot altitude in its programmed pop-up terminal maneuver. The troopers aboard the Pusik instantly fired an even dozen SAMs. 3 locked onto the harpoon's engine exhaust plume, but were unable to turn rapidly enough to hit the incoming missile and continued past it. The harpoon tipped over and dove. Penguin 8.
Era combustible
All right,
hasta,
the pilot
hasta 2.000
whispered.
libras, ahora hasta 0
There was no
libras.
stopping it now.
O 160
The missile
millas.
struck the Pusik's hull 6 feet above the waterline, slightly abaft the bridge. The warhead exploded at once, but the missile body kept moving forward, spreading 200 pounds of jet fuel that fireballed into the lowest cargo deck. In an instant, the ship disappeared behind a wall of smoke. 3 paratroopers, thrown off their feet by the impact, accidentally triggered their SAMs straight up. Taco, your bird hit just fine. We got warhead detonation. Looks like... The pilot's eyes strained at his binocular to assess the damage. MV Julius Fusik. Rudder amidships! Kirov had expected to be knocked from his feet, but the missile was a small one, and Julius Fusik still had 35,000 tons of mass. He ran out to the bridge wing to survey the damage. As the ship returned to an even keel, the ragged hole in her side rose 10 feet from the lapping waves. Smoke poured from the hole. There was fire aboard, but the ship should not flood from the blow, the captain judged. There was only one danger. Kirov rapidly gave orders to his damage control teams, and the general sent one of his own officers to assist. 100 of the paratroopers had been trained over the last 10 days in shipboard firefighting. They would now put what they had learned to use. Penguin 8. The Fusik emerged at 20
Aquí
knots
solo
from
te
the
quedan
smoke,
los Segwinder,
a
¿no?
15-foot hole
Ah,
in the ship's
firma.
side. Smoke poured from the opening, but the pilot knew at once that the damage would not be fatal. He could see hundreds of men on the upper deck, some of them already running toward ladders to fight the fire below. Where are those fighters? The pilot asked. The tactical coordinator didn't answer. He switched his radio circuit. Penguin 8, this is Cobra 1. I got 2 birds. Our missiles are all gone, but we both got a full load of 20 Mike. I can give you 2 passes. Then we got a bingo to Scotland. That's a Raj Cobra lead. The target has some helos spooling up. Watch out for handheld SAMs. I've seen him fire about 20 of the bastards. Roger that, Penguin. Any further word of Keflavik? We're going to have to find a new home for a while. Roger, copy. Okay, keep clear. We're coming in
¿Has
from
probado
uptown
las
on the
opciones
deck.
del menú F10?
The
A ver
Orion
si te van.
continued to orbit 3 miles out.
A ver,
The pilot
mirar.
didn't see the fighters until they started firing. The 2 Eagles were a few feet apart, perhaps 20 feet over the water, as their noses sparkled with the flash from their 20-millimeter rotary cannon. MV Julius Fusik. Nobody aboard saw them come in. A moment later, the water around the Pusik side turned to froth from short-falling rounds. Then her main deck was hidden with dust. A sudden orange fireball announced the
Aparentemente,
explosion of one
no,
of
al
the Russian
menos la
helicopters,
primera.
and
Pedir
burning
un
jet fuel
refueler
splattered
sí
over
que
the
me
bridge,
debería dejar.
narrowly
Yo-
missing the general and captain.
Ya, lo que pasa
What
es
was
que
that?
el
Flight.
tanque...
Jettison weapons.
American
Está más
fighters,
lejos
they
que la
came in very
base.
low. They must only have their cannon, else they'd have bombed us already. It is not over yet, my captain. The fighters split, passing left and right of the ship, which continued to move at 20 knots in a wide circle.
Bueno, voy
No
bajando
Sam
para
followed the Eagles
aterrizar.
away, and both turned,
Yo
reformed,
estoy a
and closed
30
on the
millas de
bow.
la base.
The next target was the superstructure. A moment later, the
38.
freighter's bridge was peppered with several hundred rounds. Every window was blown away, and most of the bridge crew killed. But the ship's watertight integrity hadn't been damaged a whit. Kirov surveyed the carnage. His helmsman had been blown apart by a half-dozen exploding bullets, and every man present on the bridge was dead. It took a second for him to overcome the shock and notice a crippling pain in his own abdomen, his dark jacket darkening
Hay
further with blood.
humo en la base.
Sí,
Well,
nos
Captain.
están atacando.
Ya, ya.
Only the general had had the instinct to duck behind something solid. He
Y
looked at
debería
the
de haber
eight
un barco
mutilated
también
bodies in the
humeando
pilot
cerca
house
de la base.
and wondered once again why he was so lucky. I must get the ship to port. Go aft. Tell the first officer to continue landing operations. You, Comrade General, supervise the fires topside. We must get my ship to port. I will send you help. The general ran out the door as Kirov went to the wheel. Keflavik Island,
¿Esto era Napa?
Penguin 8.
¿Mm?
Looks like the
¿Qué
fire's
era,
under
Napa?
control.
Bueno,
Anapa era,
Commented sourly.
era secundaria.
Ellos.
Yeah, how do you think they managed that? Shit, that boat should have gone up like...
Roji.
But it didn't. As they watched, a second load of troops was dispatched on the four hovercraft. The pilot hadn't thought of having the two available Eagle fighters, now heading for England, shoot them up instead of this huge black ship. Some fucking officer you are, he told himself. Penguin 8 carried 80
La pregunta
Sonobuoys,
es, ¿Anapa está muy
4
lejos?
Mk-46 ASW torpedoes, and some other high-technology weapons, none of which
No sé,
were of
yo
the
ya
least
estoy
use
aquí,
against
o
a
sea.
simple large target like this Murchie. Unless he wanted to play kamikaze. The pilot shook his head. If you want to head for Scotland, we got another 30 minutes of
Yo
fuel,
cinco,
the flight
seis.
engineer
Voy a
replied.
llamar a ver para que no me metan
Okay,
por
let's
el
take a
medio.
last look at Keflavik. I'm going up to 6,000. Ought to keep us out of SAM range. They were over the coast in 2 minutes. A Lebed was approaching the Sosis and Stigins station opposite Hampton. They could just make
Pista
out some
6,
movement
pero
on
si
the
estaba al
ground,
lado
a wisp of smoke
salvo.
coming from the building.
¿Mm?
The pilot didn't know much about the
Que me
Stigins
está diciendo la
activities,
pista 6,
but
pero
Sosis,
si hay un viento
the
de la
oceanic
hostia.
sonar surveillance system,
De la pista
was the
2-2.
principal means of detecting targets for the P-3C Orion cruise to come from.
Está gilipollas.
This station covered the gaps from
O sea,
Greenland to
también qué
Iceland,
pesado el
and
puto
from
de...
Iceland to the Faroe Islands. The main picket line needed to keep
Tío,
Russian
este no
subs
para de
out
hablar,
of the trade routes was about to go permanently off the air.
Básicamente.
Great. They were over Keflavik a minute after that. 7 or 8 aircraft had not gotten off the ground. All were burning. The pilot examined the runways through binoculars and was horrified to see that it was uncratered. Taco, you got a sentry on the line? You can talk to one right now, flight. Go right ahead, you got sentry 2.
El barco que
Sentry
tendría
2,
que
this
estar
is
por
Penguin
aquí no
8.
está.
Do you read? Over.
¿Que un barco
Roger,
de qué?
Penguin 8, this is the senior controller.
Si
We show you over
quisiéramos
Keflavik.
seguir
El
el libro,
ese.
tendría que haber un barco,
Count 8 birds
que el
on the
barco se ha
ground,
comido
all
un par de
broken, burning.
estrafeadas de
The missiles
F-15
did not,
y un
repeat,
harpoon.
not crater the air view. You sure about that, 8? Affirmative. A whole lot of blast damage.
Vale,
but I
Ya.
don't see any holes
sobre
in
la
ground.
pista
The enclosed fuel
voy a
tanks
hacer
appear
una
undamaged,
gota de
and
agua.
nothing at all seems to have hit the tank farm at Hackett Stanger. We left our friends a whole shitload of jet
Yo
fuel
voy
on
a
the airfield.
despegar en la que hemos
The
aterrizado.
base.
Voy a aterrizar en la que
Let's
hemos
see.
despegado, que era
Tower's
la
still
2-2,
standing.
me
Sí,
parece.
sí, no,
Lots of
sí, yo
smoke and
también
fire
veo por
around
eso.
air ops.
O sea, paso de
They were
0,6
pretty
con
badly
20
beaten
nudos de
up.
viento en cola.
Those runways are sure as hell usable.
¿Estás de
Over.
coña?
How about the ship you shot at? One solid hit. I eyeballed the missile in.
Esto lo tendrán que
Two of your
puesto
15
con
scraped
las
his ass, but it ain't enough.
montañas que
She'll
solo
probably
se
make port.
aterriza desde el mar.
I guess she'll try to come into Reykjavik, maybe half an hour fjorder to unload. She's got to be carrying a lot of
Bueno,
stuff.
me quedan 2.100
It's a 40,000-ton ship.
Abajo
She can
la
make
no
port in
Yo
2 or 3
estoy
hours
en
unless
base.
we can whistle up something to take her out. Don't count on it.
Para final.
What's your fuel state? We got to head for Stornoway right now. My camera guys have shot pictures of the area and that ship. About all we can do.
Spike.
Okay, Penguin 8, go find yourself a place to land. We're leaving in a few minutes too. Luck.
Ahí
Out.
estuvo.
MV Julius Pusik. The fires are out, by God, General Andreev proclaimed. There is much damage to our equipment, mainly from water, but the fires are out. His expression changed when he saw Kirov. The captain was ghostly pale. An army medic had bandaged his wound, but there had to be internal bleeding. He struggled to hold himself erect over the chart table. Come right to 003.
Final.
A
Corta.
junior officer was on the wheel. Right to 003, Comrade Captain. You must lie down, my captain, Andreev
No,
said
esa la
softly.
escribe porque si no...
I must get my ship to safe harbor first. The Pusik ran almost due north, the westerly wind and sea on her beam, and water was lapping at the missile wound. His earlier
Esa no
optimism
es la
was
2,
fading. Some scenes in the lower hull
Que
had
esa no es
sprung
la
from the
2,
missile
¿no
impact,
ves? Esa no es la que
and
hemos
water
visto.
was entering the lower
Es
cargo
por la que
deck,
hemos despegado.
though so
No,
far the
hemos
pumps were
despegado por la
keeping up
larga.
with it. There
No,
was
por
20,000
por
tons
esta.
of cargo to deliver.
Hemos cruzado
Captain, you must have medical
esa
attention,
y hemos
Andreev
despegado por la...
persisted.
Ah, bueno.
After we round the point,
Pues estoy en el suelo.
when we have the damaged port side lee, then I shall be tended to. Tell your men to stay alert. One more successful attack could finish us. And tell them they have done well. I would be happy to sail with them again.
Vale, yo estoy en final. Wow, por decir algo en final. O sea, coño, que no tengo control del avión.
¿La bola de fuego eres tú?
¿Qué bola de fuego?
¿La que hay en pista?
No. Estoy en final. Muy alto, pero en final. Con 10 grados en la aproximación.
Pues acaba de caer un petardazo de los gordos, ¿eh?
¿Otro? ¿Los misiles o qué?
Pudiera ser.
No me importa.
Te veo.
Coño, las antenas están un poco retorcidas.
Básicamente. Te sigo.
Bueno, aterriza con... Lo dejo aquí mismo y ya está, ¿no? Entre... Pues está un poco destruido. Joder, que me diga bingo en tierra, tío. Qué bien va todo, tío. Bueno, la da igual de mierda que siempre, pero... Los botones, los frames y... Atasco.
¡Hola!
Hola, más para adelante. No, sí, para pararlo se bajan los flaps. No sé si porque sin hidráulico se vuelven a bajar.
Ya. Pero es DCS.
Ya, bueno.
A ver, las misiones estas, siguiendo el libro, el contexto del libro, no están mal, ¿vale?
Yo es que no me acuerdo, tío.
Yo me lo he leído las suficientes veces como para acordarme.
Me lo leí una vez. Lo malo es que me lo leí en castellano y la traducción era un poco...
Sí, no, yo me acuerdo todavía de broza, broza, broza. Y yo preguntándome, ¿qué coño es broza, broza, broza? Hasta que leí una traducción y ponía
Era
chaf, chaf,
joder.
chaf. Y dije, me cago en los hijoputas de los traductores de los
Sí,
cojones.
ponen a cualquiera traducción.
¿Cómo se les ocurre decir eso?
Y ellos dicen que no, que un traductor que sabe traducir cualquier cosa. No es mierda.
Yo no sé si estabas tú en la lista de aire.org hace años, que entró una traductora que tradujo una
Sí,
Biblia.
me acuerdo perfectamente, sí.
Que,
Me preguntaba las palabras lo que eran. Pues vale.
sí, 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 sí. Y claro, se le contestaba y se le decía. Y tengo el libro y la verdad es que corrigiendo las cosas, corrigiéndola, pues el libro no estaba mal.
Y tienes el libro.
Sí, sí,
Porque
sí.
dijo, os daré un libro, no sé cuántos libros para esto, con la ayuda y tal. Y no se supo más de ella.
Sí, no
Yo me
se supo
acuerdo de
más
eso.
de ella, pero yo lo vi por otro sitio y dije, ah, coño, pues mira, va. A tomar por saco. Me lo compro.
¿Y cómo se llamaba, por curiosidad?
Ni
¿O
puñetera idea, lo tengo
conocías?
ahí en la estantería porque aparte es el típico libro que no abres en tu puñetera vida.
Míralo, míralo, que me hace gracia verlo.
Hostia puta. A
Ya lo
ver,
buscaré.
a
Y
ver,
por supuesto,
a ver si lo encuentro ahora.
a ver si lo encuentro bien
Eh,
para piratearlo, ya que se lo
¿Puede
traduje.
ser Enciclopedia de la Aviación Militar? Sí, diría que es este. Enciclopedia de la Aviación Militar.
Vale, vale.
Que es parte,
Entonces,
que es cosa. Yo ayudé a traducir una cosa de la 10, como no. Y sale lo que dije yo en el libro.
no sé, yo me acuerdo, preguntaba cosas como flaps también y cosas, digo, eso no lo traduzco.
Sí, no me seas gizmo, por favor, no me seas gizmo.
Sí. Bueno, pues una menos.
Básicamente.
Oye, ha ido súper bien esto, ¿eh? Con esta versión. Yo
Sí,
aquí no me muevo. Bueno, a mí. ¿Tú has notado diferencia en frames por segundo?
la verdad es que tampoco.
No. Yo es que lo de los frames ni me acordaba, pero... O sea, las clavadas que se me pegaba cada vez que... Y pongo, a ver, vista externa y puedo darle vueltas a esto sin problemas, no se engancha. O sea, no sé qué cojones hicieron, pero...
Se mearon en el cuenco.
A ver, esto
Bueno,
está un
no,
poco...
perdona, se cagaron en el cuenco.
Bueno, corto
Bueno,
la transmisión.
eh,